From WSKG Public Radio, this is Off the Page, a platform for writers from our region. I'm Bill Jaker. The life experiences of Claude Robert Sheffield could and do fill several books. And it's not just his professional experience, it's everything from a construction worker to a fine artist. His book, Two Elderly Women and One Old Man, is subtitled Stories with Lessons from My Childhood, and follows up on a book of grandma stories. But then, A Pilgrim's Journey, Mine, documents the spiritual and intellectual growth to maturity. His memoir of married life, called R.C. and Her Claude Robert, Learning How to Read Arsenia, is a touching tribute to his late wife. Claude Robert Sheffield could be the hero of a continuing series, but he's a real person, a storyteller and a teacher and a resident of Binghamton for the past 4 years, and he is with us here today. Welcome.
Thank you for the invitation.
Nice having you with us here. I got to ask you, which came first, writing about your childhood or writing about more recent events? Did you become a writer because you had how to tell about your childhood?
Yeah, writing about the childhood, because it was the feeder into what I do now. But it was remember my childhood and having it to come up out of me and be expressive on paper. First I spoke it and then wrote it. It was a release for all those creativities and that were submerged and suppressed. But the childhood being expressed in Two Elderly Women and One Old Man, and the grandma stories gave flood to a whole lot of other things.
But it was, in a way, I suppose, bringing back your childhood as a way of understanding what's happened through life.
You know, trying to realize, let's say, what did I miss and what caused me to miss it?
I'm going to ask you right at the start of the program to read something from the book Two Elderly Women and One Old Man, and this is on page 56 in this book. I should mention the book is also accompanied by a couple of CDs, so people who have the book can also listen to it. But can you read just pages 56 and 57 to the very top of 58 and give everybody an idea of what it is you're writing about?
Yes, I will indeed. Eat to get to nutrients. That's the title of the story. Being a child, by creative grace, was given to see minutely many things and to hear many words and sounds, all without any knowledge of what was that I was seeing or hearing, or what to do with what I had seen and heard. I went occasionally to those whom I felt would give me some answers to the many questions I had stored up in my little young head. So, with a question about Mr. and Mrs. Dooley and others, I went up to Miss Geneva's house. Sometimes I call her Miss Neva. A lot of people do. Sitting on her perch, hers, one summer morning, I asked her about the couple who lived on the street halfway between her house and ours, where my mother, father, and two brothers lived, with one older and one younger, and my three sisters, all of them older. This couple, the Dooleys, were short and round. Both of them. He appeared to be shorter than what he was because he was so round. I measured myself up to him one day without him knowing it. Us kids do things like that. Anyhow, I was full up with my curiosity about how they'd been so fat. And I wanted to ask why. So I asked Miss Geneva. Miss Neva, I said, why are Mr. and Mrs. Dooley so fat? She didn't look at me at all. But she got a frown on her face that wasn't pleasant. And I had been sitting there looking at her when I asked, and it wasn't there before. Then I said, sensed I didn't know that I had said something or done something that, or what I just said, it became a little uneasy. I didn't know why. After a while, the frown left her face. Then she took a deep breath and gave out a sigh. Then she turned to me with a gentle smile and said, Claude Robert, little one, I'm going to ask you answer your question, but first I'm going to teach you something. You listen good now, you hear? You listen real good. You ain't never to say nothing about nobody to something that you don't say to their face. Do you hear me, boy? I said, yes, ma'am, because I knew that what I was crying, she was requiring an answer fee, and then saying, with no answer acceptable to her. No, would not in my head do it. So I gave her an answer saying, yes, Miss Geneva, I hear you. She then went on with her teaching, saying, Claude Robert, not only is you to hear me, you've got to learn to remember what I done say to you. You've got to learn how to think, boy, and then thinks again, so that it go down deep in you. You hear me? Yes, ma'am. I said. I got very quiet and curled up in my listening position there on the edge of the porch. Would you like more?
Yeah. Let's go through that next sentence because now she answers your question.
Now, I'm going to answer your question about the duty, she said. You done see how he worked down at that train station loading all that baggage and pulling that great big cart like a mule? Well, it take a whole lot of energy to do that. And work every day he be there. Every day but Sunday. It take a whole lot of energy to do that. And so he eats a whole lot of food. It may be that sometime he eat too much. And the law say that you can get like that by eating the wrong kinds of food. If they be from the South, no, I don't think they be that. If they be colored and they be growed up on them parts of the holes, the cheap parts, they be full of grease. And that's what they be used to. That's what he like. He good for him. No, us, we likes the taste. And that's why I think they both be round and heavy.
Claude Robert Sheffield reading from his book, Two Elderly Women and One Old Man, and a really correct answer to the question. But I think first there had to be a little lesson to him about you've got to be careful what you say about people.
Yes. People are, be sensitive to people, be sensitive. We are glib and flip with the mouth, and we can pierce and wound deeply. And those wounds are hard to address and redress.
Yeah. I'd just like to remind everybody here that if you're tuned in at 13 minutes after 1 on this Tuesday afternoon and you'd like to join in our conversation with Claude Robert Sheffield, the phone number is 888-359-9754. 888-359-9754, or you can send us a question or a comment by email to offthepage@wskg.org. Off the page at wskg.org. Remember to make that all one word, or you give us a call at 888-359-9754. Don't leave out any numbers either when you do call. I've got to ask you this, and it's I'm sure you won't mind if I ask you, how old are you?
I'm 83 years young.
Okay. And how young are you? Which means that you were a child during the 1920s and 30s?
1925, 4 years before the Great Depression of 1929, and I lived all the way through it.
Wow. And I take it times are very, very different than they are now.
They are, but I feel in my spirit and psyche that we're going back to it. We have not learned from past experiences. We have not learned that you build from the bottom up. There's a philosophy here in this city, state, and nation at large that you build from the top down.
What do we need to build then? What would you say?
Go back step by step, learn the art of walking backwards, and find out some of those things that were done to impress and done, let's say, from the top down. There is a patron society philosophy in the state of New York and also in New Jersey. It's been handed down ever since they pushed Iroquois. By the way, I'm part Iroquois. They pushed us out our reservations. But they came in with the English and the Dutch and established a patron society. And so the school and educational system here in this state, these two states, are over in a bunch. There's 181 courses in Binghamton. Out in California, 64 is the norm for a high school. 3 times. And so it's patron society lifestyle that is oppressive and is breaking the backs of the laborer and the property owner. They can't afford to stay.
And this is something that you saw happening in the 30s, and you see it happening again now.
Oh, yes. The newspapers' banks collapsed because they were building from the top down. They were in the Coshocton, Ohio was
that's where you were from.
where I was born and raised, was a newspaper supplier. Not so much the printed material, but they were the calendar producers on advertising. The famous artists of the day, Montgomery Flagg, and people of that nature had homes there or came there and did work for the firms that did their silk press printing and their artwork. And they made matchbooks and stuff like that. This was the advertising center, and it went kapoosh.
Yeah.
It got wiped out.
The situation with African Americans has been so different from the 1920s to today. And I don't know, are you concerned that there might be a retrenchment in that?
No, that depends on where you were born and raised. Don't forget to say, I was in this little town between Roscoe and Cloudville, which had a piece. It was a company town. Cloudville was a company town. Company store, company people.
Which company?
Mr. Clouds.
Okay.
They made these huge concrete underground dirt. That's him. And he was a gentleman farmer, which I also worked for that. But it was two industries, the advertising and the cloud.
Yeah.
And when there was no need more for advertising, the paper plants rolled up, the train stopped running, you got one train a day maybe, and then you start getting one passenger train a week. And so, too much in one direction is building from the top down.
Uh-huh. Well, I've got to ask you about
Surely.
the way that you have written these stories, because so much of this is written in African American dialect.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is, which makes it a little difficult for some people. And I read this, I hope nobody's offended by this, but this is the way it says, don't they know that the machine can't make them no more than what they done told it? And that's the only thing a machine can do.
Right.
Now, not everybody would speak that way, and I've known people all my life who did, but this will make a lot of people very uncomfortable to have to read it.
Yes, a lot of blacks are uncomfortable with me. I got 8 ethnicities in me. But they're my brown skin. Why do I dare to read Negro dialect or write in it? Because I want to pierce and penetrate you as well as the one who has no blackness in him. I want to pierce and penetrate the personage, and it has nothing to do with pigmentation. Mm-hmm. You have 9 facets by creative grace, and not one of them is named pigment.
Yeah. But so far as the way people would read a story written that way, I know you like the idea of simplicity.
Yes, I want to pierce the balloon so they can hit the simplicity, what's being said. What am I saying? Ask that. What are you saying, and why are you saying it that way?
Mm-hmm. There's another story in here that you tell that I think is just wonderful, where little Claude Robert goes up to his grandma, and he says, "Teach me about something."
Oh, yeah.
And it's in the Grandma Stories. We got books all over the table here today. I've got to say this. But the Grandma Stories, page 70. And the thing that gets me is how he wants so much to learn.
Yes.
And well, why don't you just read the first couple of pages of this this story. This is Claude Robert being taught about nothing by his grandmother, and it's your story. You tell it well.
Okay. Grandma, will you teach me something today? Will you? Said little Claude Robert early in the morning. It was so early that his grandmother hadn't had a cup of coffee yet. She had put the pot on, but it wasn't quite ready yet. She paused for a moment or two, then said, "Claude Robert, what you want me to teach you?" Claude Robert, with simple openness, said, "I don't know, Grandma. I don't know what. But I want you to teach me something today. Will you, Grandma? Will you?" His grandmother paused again, and after pouring herself a cup of coffee, but not sipping any, she said, "Claude Robert, you've got to wants to know what you wants to be told. Then you be told something to teach you. They can teach you nothing, and nothing about nothing." Claude Robert raced into this. What he saw was an opening and asked quickly, Grandma, will you teach me about nothing? Will you, Grandma, huh? Will you, Grandma, will you? Sprightly, eagerly, he asked. His grandmother, being a very wise woman, chose to drink some of her coffee on hearing this question. Then this little request from her little Claude Robert. Having drank a little of her coffee, it being fresh, refreshed her in the early morning with this child whose mind ran like a young racehorse, one who had not been raced or trained to race yet. Taking a pause to respond to this little one that she loved very much, she knew he needed a great deal of help with his thoughts, his ways of thinking, and the use of his mind. Having done this in half a minute, she said, Claude Robert, I'm going to teach you about nothing, like you done asked me to do. Now you know your numbers, don't you? You know them right well, do you? Yes, ma'am. Yes, Grandma. I know my numbers real good. Yes, ma'am, I do, Grandma. I do, spoke up little eager Claude Robert. Running to rush into new teaching, seating with his elbows on his knees, hands over his under his cheekbones, to listen real good. Not wait. He knew that it was good for him to do. So he just did it. All right, said Grandma. You gives me the first number that be in the list of numbers. Now you said, stay with the first and number for me. Go on now, loud enough for me to hear. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Grandma. I hear you, said Claude Robert, continuing in his joy, showing his grandmother that he at 5, going on 6, knew his numbers. So he started with, saying them loud enough for her to hear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. See, Grandma, I know my numbers. Saying this part just a beaming, just like a flashlight turned on in the dark. He was proud of himself and showed it. His grandmother, a very wise woman, sat with a cup and coffee. It had gotten just a bit cool there yet. Now, she chose not to drink while he was reciting his numbers, but give him much attention that was right to do, not distracting him in his concentrating. Then she spoke up with, Claude Robert, can you write them numbers down on paper? I want to see that. I want to show you something. Will you do that for me now? Yes, ma'am. Yes, Grandmother. I can write them down. Yes, Grandma, I will write them down. Can I have a piece of paper, please? Said Claude Robert, eager and anxious to show his grandma how smart he was. You look on that table next to my Bible, and you get a pad and a piece of paper. You get a piece from me now while I warms up my coffee. It done got a little cool somehow. Smiling to herself and Claude Robert as she did. Claude ran and got the pad. He always seemed to run when his grandmother told him to do something. It was not the same with his mother, however. Coming back to the talking place, just outside the kitchen on the porch, he hadn't wrote his numbers. It was then that she went back to her chair at the back porch and sat. No sooner had she sat when Claude Robert went and sought to shove his writing into his grandma's hands. He saw then that she had both hands around her cup, so he held it in his hand for a minute, then laid it in her lap. He was anxious to show Grandma how bright he was. Very softly, but with some sternness in her voice, she says, Claude Robert, you take up your paper off my lap and hold on to it till I can take it into my hands. You do that. Now, you hear me, boy?
And what happens in this story, I want to just jump ahead, is she teaches him the power of zero.
The power of zero, but also the power of respect for your teacher.
Yeah. But the thing is that without zeros, nothing else could exist.
Yes, it does. In the minds of men, everything exists except zero. No one believes in a zero. They hate zeros. They don't even begin. The child and men who are in finance hate zeros. They start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They leave out zeros. They have zero coupons. They have zero derivatives. Zeros on front, the decimals way out in front of them. But they ignore them. And that's how come that this debacle in Washington, D.C. is taking place. The Madoff. Nobody said, where did that go? They had a lot of zeros in front of it. They never traced the number. Where did this money be deposited? Over here. Where? Over in front of all those zeros.
And I suppose they all needed a grandma who sometime would have told them that this is important, a zero.
You've got to know what your numbers are and how to follow numbers. So you have to know your numbers and where the zeros are placed, and then necessarily where those decimals with the zeros go.
Was this the actual situation between you and your grandmother? Were you that close?
No, as I say, I was seen by my grandmothers. I never knew my grandmothers. They both died before I was of an age of knowledge of them. And so these things I learned by working in the construction and learning in the business world, how people lied about numbers and how they manipulated and deceived me. My dollar was worth 50 cents. My pay, 50 cents, 40%. I learned how they shifted numbers. They would pay him, so he got $1 a day and all he could eat, and he got his dollar. There were others who paid $5, and they got the full $5. Mm-hmm. I still got my dollar.
Yeah, and so to write about grandma stories, write about being a small child again, it sounds like you're trying to grow up one more time. You're trying to reach back.
No, it's learning how I got exposed to simplicity, and I had learned how to hang on to it. That was my responsibility, not hers.
Yeah. I want to remind everybody we're speaking with Claude Robert Sheffield on Off the Page today, and if you would like to join in the conversation, our number 888-359-9754, 888-359-9754. The email address is offthepage@wskg.org. offthepage@wskg.org. You have worked in construction?
I worked as a laborer all the way up from the dumb end of the stick up to a structural draftsman, architectural draftsman, designer, and an interior superintendent for a firm out of New York City. Had a branch in San Francisco. When Rockefeller had one there, I worked for Rockefeller Construction in San Francisco. And then I was hired by a company to do some structural drafting, and it was supposed to take 3 months. I did it in 2 months, and it blew them away how I didn't dog my work. Instead of being let go, the superintendent said, I want him as my associate. I went from a draftsman to associate superintendent, and I finished a $21 million printing press plant outside of San Francisco.
Yeah, you also, though, are a designer and an architect, and it says that you build buildings on strange-shaped lots or something?
Oh, yes. I designed, had a privilege of doing about 3 boomerang houses. One is in the Arroyo Seco of Brisbane, overlooking the airport. It's set into this V-shaped arroyo, and I took full advantage of it and can zoom. And one overlooks the salt mines or the salt piles of Redwood City. This is about 20 miles away. You can see it. And the other one was a fan-shaped house that looked from near Redwood City all the way to the Campanile in Berkeley, California.
Yeah.
That's miles.
But you ought to understand how these buildings were built, what it took to construct them before you could go ahead and design something.
See, the mind, having this gift of mind that God gave me, I have an awesome mind, but disciplining it and learning the construction arts, you build from the bottom. You dig a trench, pour your foundation, and then you build up. You put rebar in it. If you don't put any rebar, don't build up. Mm-hmm. And that's how I learned how to take my conceptions and then made them stable and lastable. Like I say, these houses are 40 years old, and they're still standing in earthquake country.
Is this something you can apply to writing? That you need somehow to understand the way things are constructed before you can put down your ideas, or do you just sort of let it come out?
I allow it to flow. I have a rhythm of my personage, and there's a rhythm of my body, my mind, and my psyche that sings. As I say, I walk the back roads to tell my sister's stories. Well, I would sing to myself. I make up stories as I went, but I entertained myself because I was in the dark or lonely, and I didn't want to be lonely, so I would make up things as I went along. And so I do these things as I go, and I lay a foundation as I go. But where I am going, I know where I'm going and what I'm going to do when I get there. And then I suck it to him.
Yeah. That is just wonderful. The thing is, when you began to sit down to write your own grandma stories, to write your memoirs, to write about your life, was there any kind of new skill that you had to learn in order to become a writer after doing everything else?
No, I take that back. I did have to learn the discipline of, I felt and thought much and wrote faster than my... So I had to go back and learn syntax.
Oh yeah.
But the meat that was there, I would sit down and I wrote out the titles of the first 12 stories of this grandma.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying two elderly women. I think I wrote all of those in about 1 hour. I wrote the titles in 1 hour.
Yeah.
Then I went back and fleshed out the stories. But that's how awesome it was.
Uh-huh. You are also, though, quite obviously, a storyteller.
Yes,
and
yes.
Now, there is this great oral tradition that has existed through all of time.
Yes.
Still exists today, will exist forever, but still, it's not the same as sitting down and writing something on a page. Do you have to tell the story to somebody else first before you can write it?
No. I am the person I'm telling my story to. I'm first and foremost the one I'm talking to, and I allow you to listen in. No, if you're not there, that doesn't stop my story. I'm going to tell my story if there's nobody inside. I walk those back roads talking to cows and chickens and roosters and hens and mules and donkeys. I was telling my stories, getting ready to tell my sister's stories. And I would go to the sanatoriums and I would see 6 or 7 or 8 people other than my sister. Hi. I bless them. It's out.
Yeah.
My stories are to go out. I don't tell them to myself. I write them, but I don't tell them to myself. I listen in.
Do you ever surprise yourself?
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't know I had the story. I didn't know I have this idea.
Not that much, but I didn't know where it made that turn. There's sometimes a little jog or turn in it. I said, wow.
Our phone number again, 888-359-9754, if you're tuned in at 34 minutes after 1 in the afternoon to speak with Claude Robert Sheffield. 888-359-9754, or by email to offthepage@wskg.org. Your grandmothers, the elderly stories that you tell, they seem to have a lot of moral lessons for you and religious teaching and so on, but you said before you never really knew your grandparents.
No, I didn't. They saw me, like I say, both my grandmother, I knew my grandfather. Oh. I knew my mother's father. He was a preacher who I did not like at all. He bought himself out of slavery. And then he bought his wife out of slavery. She was the daughter of her slave owner who was a Jewish Italian Jew, whatever you put it. Well, he bought himself out and then he bought her out, but then he made her his slave. I did not like the man.
Uh-huh. Wow. But what I wanted to ask is the book that's called A Pilgrim's Journey, Mine, which has on it a couple of your drawings right on the cover. One is a picture of you as a youngster and actually taken from a photograph. I've seen it in another one of your books. And it says, "The child who heard I do." And then on the other hand, there is somebody who looks like a grown-up, and he's sitting alongside looks like a stream with garbage floating down it.
You're right. It's drifting and garbage bill.
And it says, "Outside of doom, hearing I will." And it's a story of spiritual growth.
Yes, it is. The I do began with the fact that I was graced with precociousness. And at the age of 5, I was so pitifully lonely and alone. My mother had failed to abort me with the aid of her friends. But at 5, I said, is there anyone in the universe that loves me and I don't have to do anything to earn it? And here was this 5-year-old kid in this little place in Coshocton, Ohio, who heard a word, I do. I heard a strong, clear, masculine voice, and I asked everybody you could possibly think of for the next 4 or 5 years, who was it that spoke to me? Who answered? Who said, I do?
Yeah.
And I searched for that for years, and I think I was about in my late 20s, over there in Germany, laying on a bed.
You were in the Army at the time.
In the Army, a sergeant and combat engineers, all black battalion under all white officers, and oppressed like a son of a gun. And oddly enough, these black troops, were stationed in the SS troop barracks.
Wow.
The Super Aryan barracks occupied by blacks.
Well, this was after the war, too.
It was the tail end. That's the tail end. We were in occupational forces.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I was there on my bed, internal bleeding. And doctors couldn't find anything wrong with me. And I got an encounter with the Holy Spirit as it was saying, when are you going to listen to me? I've been trying to get your attention, and you're running doing your own thing. I told you at 5 that I loved you. I was the one who answered. But nobody told me who you were, sir. And I'm saying, so they say the Holy Spirit, God doesn't speak. Well, God the Father speaks and God the Holy Spirit speaks. And I heard both. And I will. Said, I will change you. I will get you up out of this bed. But you must learn how to listen to me and accept my training, my teachings, and submit your will to mine.
But this is something that had to come actually from within you, didn't it? I mean, this was not something your grandmother told you.
Oh, no. It's a personal thing because, see, I knew that I was a sinner when I was 13. I knew that I had a violent streak in me. I was capable of murder. And I was stopped in a moment of killing my brother when I was 13. I took a baseball bat. I was going to knock his head off. And all of a sudden, I froze and dropped the bat, and I ran and hid in the cemetery all day long. Yeah. So I knew that inside there was a beast.
Yeah.
And I tried to cover up the beast with all kinds of things. And I never found out who was that spoke at 5, but there I was in the hospital in Germany and said, I will. But you must do what I tell you to do from now on.
Well, because in a pilgrim's journey, it sort of reminds you of Pilgrim's Progress a little bit.
That's the basis of it.
Yeah. You are meeting up with personifications of all sorts of forces in our lives. Zeal comes into here.
Yes.
There is, which is something you say you really got to watch out for, I suppose.
It's not so much watching out for, but learning how to harness it with the other horse.
Yeah.
Zeal must be harnessed with knowledge. As I was sharing with the banker this morning, no, knowledge is not power. If it's not yoked with understanding and wisdom, it's deadly. But wisdom, zeal without knowledge, is just as deadly. And I was a zealous person with lacking knowledge.
And some of the characters, and they really show up as characters in this book, are smugness and denial and justification and liar. Can I ask you just to read a page of this?
Sure.
On page 96, to remind everybody our phone number is 888-359-9754. When Mr. Sheffield finds his page, 888-359-9754, just to give people a sense of the way this is written and the sense of what you have gone through.
Yeah. It's beginning to get to know yourself. Know your wounds of your 9 facets. And here I was. It was around this time that I met the children of the Kindness family. I give them names, what they're really reminding. Hopeless, surly, sometime, pretense, weak-will, give me, and crafty. Helpless was their youngest son who stayed very close to his mother. He was pale in complexion and seemed to have little or no energy, looking and acting like the runt of a litter. Surly was the next and the oldest, and like her name, was sullen and morose, even dour. She was most seen with her brother Hopeless, those being countless, continuous, and constant companions. Sometime was seen was next in the ascending order. He was related to Hortense, also Pretense. And Weakwill and Pretense and Hortense were constant companions. And they liked being together because they relied on each other.
Yeah, I just want to give people a sense of the way you have encountered these characters who are coming upon you, and they seem sometimes more vivid, more active than you are, than other people are.
Yes, because we seldom see ourselves as we are, and I learned the art of mirror talk. I learn it and I teach it. Mirror talk. People at least. I shave, yes, but I need to get closer to that. I need to get up close in the mirror and look into my eyes. And tell me, what do you see? Read back to me, eyes. Tell me who you see. Whoa! Why are you so angry? What are you so fierce? Huh? I don't see that fierceness in me, but that's what I'm saying. I learned this art, and I teach it. How people get to know themselves, the inner persons. They have 9 facets. They are totally untouched. Have never been exposed to, know not. And they live a life without it. And I don't like that. I want people to wake up.
Mm-hmm. And you've got to look yourself in the eye and say...
Well, learning how to do it, though. Just look at yourself in the eye. You got to know what you're doing when you go to do it. Don't just go to look in the mirror. Go for a reason. And go to find out something. But prepare yourself to find out and see what you see, what's reflected back to you.
Wow. Claude Robert, I got to ask you about the book about... R.C. and her, Claude Robert, Learning How to Read Arsenia. This is probably the smallest of the books that you have written, and yet it's, I think, the most personal.
Yes, it is. It began the day after she died. For 5.5 years, she was very ill, very sick, and I didn't know it, how the source and root of it. But when she died, I took her to the hospital maybe about 20 days before she died. And when I wheeled into the hospital, and the doctor looked at her and said, "There's nothing we can do." And I went through, the surgeon looked at her and did the examination, said it was a congenital condition. After she died, I looked at it, congenital. That means birth-related. Yes, this child was born with a heart that was not supposed to last 7 years. And here she was, a woman of 67 and 3 months. I'm saying, whoa, you talk about the goodness of God blessing my life. A wife is a gift from God, as the word says, and I know it personally. And there it was, a child who should have died at 7, and I knew her for 37.5 years as a husband and wife, and courted her for 2 years before I wooed her to marry me, because I was so much boy, surly, pretending, and all of that stuff.
And you've told the whole story, and you tell the story backwards. It begins with you returning home just after her death. Such a sad scene. But then it goes back through your experiences and back into your courtship and back into your first meeting. You met her on an elevator?
I met her in the lobby.
In the lobby.
630 Sansom Street on the big federal building, and there she came out of the elevator, and I had just come back from a coffee break. And I saw her, and get out of the way, people. I pushed people aside to get to her. As she was heading for the elevator, I held open the elevator doors and squeezed my little buns in there. I'm 29, I'm 30, about 30 years, 29, 30 years old, and I'm acting like a 16-year-old kid because my eyes had seen the most beautiful woman in the world.
Mm-hmm. And there is, by the way, a really beautiful picture on the cover of you and Arsenia, and you're just sort of smiling at each other. Lovely people.
And so I learned to love her, and love myself less, and learn how to show love and give love away.
Mm-hmm. But the book is called Learning How to Read Arsenia. What do you mean by that?
Well,
because
she was not as verbal as I am or was. And so she would sit and look and smile a lot. And I'm trying to draw her out. And so what are you thinking? She said, well, I don't get a sensing that you're really interested in what I'm saying. I said, oh, this is a preparatory for you to go on to another thing. I said, well, I do want to know your love. I do want to know. She said, well, if you will look, I'll teach you how to read me. My eyes and my body language. I said, huh? And I said, what? She said, well, we go to these parties. You're always trying to drum up business for your architectural end of it. Why not spend some time with me or look across the room occasionally and see? I'm saying, I'm ready to go. And I was not paying attention. So I didn't learn how to read Arsenia, that she'd had enough of my clawing and climbing up the social strata.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were trying to climb on my back, and I wasn't even seeing that. She said, they're trying to use you, and I'm saying, huh? She said, I'm telling you, my body language, I'm trying to tell you with my eyes, I'm trying to tell you with my face, my gestures. Come away, let's get out of here. They'll devour you.
Yeah. And so it really does take a special sensitivity and I suppose a kind of a secret language, and yet it is a universal language.
Yes, it is a universal language. A lot of men don't know it. A lot of women are trying to teach their husbands how to read them.
Yeah, but you did learn, and that's...
I did learn.
And do you also have a body language that she had to learn then?
Yes, but she had to teach me how to time and place.
Yeah.
There's a time for that, but no, don't you touch me on my derriere ever again.
Okay.
Don't you ever touch me there again. You take my hand and you pull me to you, but don't you pat my body.
Mm-hmm. At least
out
not in a
public.
crowded room with a lot of other people.
Well, in any place out in public.
Okay.
There's a house is for that, and then we can go further in the bedroom. But don't you ever do that again. So I learned.
Yeah. You also mentioned, though, that you say your wife and children are deceased.
Yes.
Your children, I got to ask you about this. Your children did not live long, did they?
No, they did not. I held the 3 boys in the palm of my hand. That's how long they lived.
Wow.
Premature. And I found out she had this incompetent cervix, which was aggravated by the fact that her heart was not designed to support children. It didn't pump enough blood. Cassandra was the only one that took form. She was somewhere maybe about the last trimester, whatever they call it. And so she had form and shape to her. And we agreed. I just went away and wept, but I did not in her presence, because I didn't want my wife to have guilt. So I went off and cried. And then went back. I said, it was a girl, RC. I'd like to name her. She said, so would I. And so we both come up simultaneously with the name Cassandra Elaine. And I just blessed my soul immensely. I never did know and name the boys. I didn't know they were boys until the Holy Spirit revealed that to me many years later. Knowing me, I would have done my masculine mode role.
Name them too.
Yeah.
But you wrote this book called Letters, Notes, and Cards to Our Daughter Cassandra Elaine from Dad. And it is just filled with the kinds of advice that a parent would want to give a child as they grow up. I suppose begins, in fact, a drawing here, kind of a line drawing of you holding the baby. And you're writing about just about everything, about respect for elders and dependability, and then you're getting into advice on going to school, and advice on sex, and advice on dating, and then speaking about professional development. I mean,
yes,
all the things that you would have told her.
Yes. Well, this came about. This has been augmented and enhanced, having been exposed to 2 young women about 2 years before my wife died. We met 2 young women who had graduated from college here on the East Coast, back somewhere in Massachusetts. And they had moved to San Francisco. And we had met at a church, and so I invited them to dinner. We would have Wednesday night dinners. And we would talk about the Bible, but we also talk about life. They were 2 young single women and attractive young women. And into how to conduct yourself with the dudes here, and how not to throw yourselves away, how to date but not audition with your bodies or audition with theirs.
Yeah.
And so that's developed a relationship with these 2 young women.
I think you will read one of these on page 186. I think this one is sort of nice. All of these letters and notes, a couple of them are a little bit over a page, and most of them are very short. This one is very short, and actually I suppose it would be written to your sons because it begins guys.
Yes, but there would be someone similar in the other section about to the daughter. But this, my letter about sensitivity is to have this companion work in you. It is sensibility. So now is the time for a dictionary. This will help you to respond to your sensitivity with some clear thinking. One without the other is not right to do and can make matters worse. Sensitivity without thought becomes misdirected emotions and causes many little fights to get out of hand and quickly. Learn how to be sensitive to your own emotions, hopefully before they get out of hand, before you are drawn into a fight without reason for you to fight. Practice turning and walking away quickly. I love that. It can be learned.
At the bottom actually says P.S. It can be learned. There's a P.S. in every one of these.
Oh, yes, P.S. on all of these.
As if you're never really finished.
Never. No, I am never really finished. P.S. It can be learned.
Yeah.
And I learned because I was a very strong young man, having worked on a farm and on a railroad. When I was about 19 or 20, I could chuck bodies over my shoulders. I could be very brutal.
You look like you still could.
Well, yes, but I don't do that.
I hope not.
But like I say, I learned the fact that I had this awesome strength, this short fuse and sensitivity, and I had learned how to walk away, even run from a fight.
Mm-hmm.
I even learned how to run from getting into a fight. Here I was 6'2", I was about 198, and I could, like I worked with a jackhammer all day long, so I would turn in barrels and buckets and railroad ties was nothing for me.
And
but
you have
sensitive in my heart. I couldn't stand. I hit a person once, and that was it. I couldn't do it again.
Have you written about that? I mean,
yeah, it's in some of the things in my for the boys.
Because I hadn't seen that. Yeah, but I mean, so far as that kind of story is concerned, just for yourself.
Well, I stated about it briefly like that. Walk away, get away, because I think in the Pilgrim's Journey there's an episode of where I would get to the brutality, and it's a beast. I knew that I had a very sensitive conscience in the heart and the person, but I also know it was in a very strong body.
Yeah. Some of these books you have published yourself. You started a publishing company. It's called My Willie's Press.
Yes.
What's the meaning of that?
My Willie was a woman who had the ability to do anything, and just opposite-handed even.
Who was she?
Mary Catherine Myrtle Arsenio. That came out to be her final name. I married her as Myrtle Arsenio, and we took her when she was about ready to die. I took her to Europe, and her birth certificate from Texas became Mary Catherine Myrtle Arsenio. So a couple of aunts threw some names in there and added to it.
Mm-hmm.
But she was from Bivens, Texas, and I stole her scene and locale from my grandmother's store. And she was, 2 years, 2 months, and 2 weeks younger than I. And we met in San Francisco in this building I told you about. It's 630 Sansom Street.
Yeah.
She was attending the school at Louise Salinger Fashion Design, while I was attending a couple of night courses at Heels Architectural School. And it was either that or go back to Ohio and get my AA under the GI Bill. But I knew if I went back to Ohio, I would never see Arsenio again. And that made the decision, no. I saw a woman who I knew I loved. I didn't know how to show love, but I was going to learn. I was willing to learn how. And the richest blessing apart from a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, the richest gift of my life has been my wife, Arsenio.
Yeah.
I've been single widowed for 14 years now. And I have no blanks in my life. I'm remembering relationships, and I knew that I could never give that type of relationship with another woman, so I would never insult another woman.
Yeah. We've only got a minute or so left here. Is there another book coming, and coming from My Willie's Press?
No, but there shall be probably be some songs. As I say, I was refused to be taught by my mother, who was a pianist, an organist, and a singer. She refused to teach me, but I am a quick study and quick student. So I'm composing some worship and praise songs.
Mm-hmm. To actually sing in church. I mean, this is
something... church or otherwise.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't have to be limited to church because, like I say, I teach in my own home. I find most churches are full of religion, and religion is anti-righteousness, and God hates religion. My wife was the one who told me, Claude, look at this. Religion is worship according to the rules of men. It has nothing to do with the rules of God. I read the dictionary and it blew me away. And I took that and I nursed it. And righteousness is what I am called to teach and show and tell and teach and preach.
Yeah.
And so I do. I came out of religion. My grandfather was religious. My father was religious. My mother was religious. And she tried to kill me. Uh-huh. And so I practiced, me and my wife practiced righteousness, and we were used by God to heal, set free. We had done awesome gifts of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. And I think at that point, I'm afraid we got to stop right here.
Got to stop right there.
Claude Robert Sheffield's R.C. and Her Claude Robert is published by Ex Libris, and his other books are, as you heard, from My Willie's Press Publishing Company. And you can get more information about all these books by checking our website at wskg.org. Also on the web, you can listen again to this and other off-the-page programs in our audio archive. Download the program as a podcast. That's our newly redesigned website, wskg.org. Claude Robert, it's been a great pleasure meeting you. Thanks so much for coming to visit.
My pleasure, sir. My pleasure.
Off the Page returns 2 weeks from today when we turn from personal history to an important time in world history. 2 of the most crucial events of World War II in the Pacific were the battles of Midway and Guadalcanal.